A very special greeting to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, the President of the Republic of Armenia, Vahan Khachaturian, the President of the Republic of Ecuador, Daniel Noboa, the President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, Umaro Sissoko Embalo, the President of the Transitional Presidential Council of Haiti, Leslie Voltaire, the President of the Republic of Suriname, Chan Santoki, the Vice President of the Republic of Colombia, Franciana Marquez Mina, the Vice President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, David Choquehuanca Cespedes. A greeting to the heads of delegation and to the delegations of the 196 countries participating, the ministers of foreign affairs, ambassadors, heads of diplomatic missions, and representatives of international bodies accredited by the Republic of Colombia and the United Nations. Governor of the Department of the Valle of Cauca, Miriam Francisca Toro, the Mayor of the City of Santiago de Cali, Alejandro Eder, civil servants of the national government, national media, and international media, and in fact, to everyone here, all of our special guests, and everybody watching us over streaming at this high-level segment of the COP16 and the launch of the Global Coalition Peace with Nature. This is the most political segment of the event, although it's all political. There is no public action by human beings that is not political. And thus, I'd like to address some very political issues related to the discussions that I have been present in at different meetings, international meetings, COPs, many of them now. Too many for me not to understand the type of discussions that are being held around the world. I'd say the lack of action that we're seeing around the world when it comes to, in my opinion, the greatest problem humanity faces. When I say time and again that we are beginning the era of human extinction, I think I'm not exaggerating. It's not an apocalyptic vision, although what we are experiencing is worse than the apocalypse. The book of Revelations, the last book of the New Testament. The time of extinction affects cultures. It brings different political expressions from what humanity should do. These times bring with them a kind of cataclysm, a civilizational cataclysm, a crisis of civilization as such and of human culture, which can only be addressed if we stop the causes of extinction. That is a terrible disaster. This is the 1933, at the global level as I call it. That was the year, 1933, in which in Germany Hitler came to power. But now it's not in Germany, it's not in Berlin. Now it's all around planet Earth. Political expressions are an expression of the climate crisis. And I will try to delve into this. The fact that the COP that you have seen here in Cali, its form, aesthetically speaking, which not only brings together the diversity of the peoples of the world here in this place, which is not very well known, except by people who are salsa addicts, because this is the world capital of salsa. Salsa was invented in the Caribbean, but it's in the Pacific that its capital was built. I don't know why, but that's the case. I think our Cuban colleagues don't think that. Maybe our Dominican colleagues or others from the Caribbean don't think that, but Sometimes we dance a bit better here. It's a competition there in Havana. The town that surrounds us, in our reflections, the diverse people of Colombia, which reflects the diversity of the world, because for historic reasons, 5 centuries ago, practically all the peoples of the world came here because we were the bridge between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Because we could unite more quickly than anyone else, Europe with China and Japan. Because we could unite right here, North America and South America, the heart of the world, as I've said previously, if you look at it from a certain historical point of view. And that's not just because of our geographic location, but because this brought with it enormous human diversity, which you can see in the streets here, in the colors of people's skin, in the way people speak Spanish and other languages. We're the country with the 4th largest number of languages in the world. They're not well known. Cali isn't very well known. Our biodiversity isn't very well known. The 2nd greatest biodiversity in the world. And as you go over these mountains, you see the biodiversity per square meter is the greatest of anywhere on this planet. There are so many species of animals and plants in 1 square meter. Nowhere will you find more of them than here on the Pacific coast because of the rain, because of the ocean, etc. And so, holding the COP16 on biodiversity here in Cali was not just an act of generosity, and it wasn't a coincidence. This is the capital of biodiversity. And for the world to know about this city for these reasons and not for others. Moving away from the violence, building a fairer society, a more tolerant society despite differences in skin colors, one which will be economically fairer. We'll be able to demonstrate that it is the people that must take decisions regarding human life. That there is such a democratic deficit, and this brings us to politics, when we meet at COPs, sometimes in places where nobody goes because it seems we want to make decisions that have to do with every person's life, that have to do with humanity, and we do this far from humanity. We're worried about humanity, that is protesting. We're worried about humanity, which wants to make decisions. We're worried about democracy globally, when we're talking about nothing more or less than the very life of humanity at the beginning of the times of extinction. Those COPs in the middle of the desert, those COPs in the middle of snow, those COPs in the middle of the sea, without people, without towns, where, and I'm sorry for saying it this way, but where the bureaucracy and the policymakers meet to make decisions on behalf of others. And the others are billions of people, very different from them. That is not democracy. That is nothing more than fear that humanity will take the reins and the control of its planet in order to save the life of the planet, because there are interests. And so the demonstration of this COP16, I hope this will be the first but not the only one that will be like this here in a country which we want to be democratic. It's not yet. A country we want to be fair. It is still the country with the 2nd greatest social inequality in the world. This is a country we want to be peaceful, though the levels of violence are still high. A country where we want to have reconciliation with nature, but which still lives on its knees in the thrall of carbon. So from here, with certain moral authority, there are things we can say. We need to put democracy into decisions. A new global system needs to be created that will bring together the basis of human society and civilization and bring that together with fundamental decision-making. Bureaucratic interference, let's use that term, is there for one reason: so that above the voices of humanity, the interests of greed are heard. It is greed which is determining what will be done regarding topics as fundamental as the climate crisis or the death of biodiversity, which is nothing more nor less than the death of life. It is nothing more nor less than the death of humanity. Greed against life. Greed against humanity. And so, there are topics that I think we need to talk about, but we don't talk about. In academia, in books, in discussions, and in politics of society. Greed has a way of producing. It's a way of producing that seeks to earn, and by maximizing earnings, it maximizes the destruction of the planet and of life. One or the other. We haven't gotten to that discussion yet. Another way of producing is needed. Another way of producing in order to safeguard life on this planet and the life of humanity. If this question is answered yes, then the solutions are political, not technical only. And if the solutions are political, that means the solutions fall to the peoples of the world. Another way of producing, drawing away from greed that chooses sustainability for humanity on this planet and not just the sustainability of greed and making more money. We could share some concrete examples here. Oil, a word which is hardly even uttered at the COP. One of the surprises I had, one of the first COPs I participated in, was that there were oil companies there as patrons, or that these were being held in oil-producing countries. I won't deny that. I won't deny that there could be argument there, but why was there so much insistence on that? Now, after Azerbaijan, I'll say, there will be COPs. As I said, this is the first one held in a country of biodiversity and not of oil. That's part of Colombian society. And then in Belém de Pará in Brazil, that is a magical place because the great Amazon River is an ocean of fresh water, and it reaches the ocean of salt water, and it joins it there. And it's thanks to that place where the waters join in the heat of the waters and the cold stream that comes from Antarctica. And that is what generates the great Amazon jungle that brings water to, for example, the capital city of Colombia. What happens if that cold water stream from Antarctica stops because the ice has melted? What happens if the Amazon River dries up? As we're seeing now, there will be no jungle, there will be no water in the Andes, and the lungs of the planet will no longer exist. What will happen to humanity then? Some think we'll live in bubbles, artificial atmospheres created by ourselves, in a dream of engineering and mega-engineering. That is not real. What will happen with us? We will start to die. So, those geographic sites of the COP that are being built in areas of biodiversity, I think they can be definitive. The COP16 in Cali, the COP30 in Belém de Pará must be decisive. They must be turning points where we won't continue doing the same thing. Who believes that to resolve a problem of the size of that of the climate crisis, the pollution of all of the planet's atmosphere by the factories of greed, do we think that will be solved using the same methods as always? On TV, sometimes you see the great neoliberal experts of the dominating economy saying the same terrible things, that the market on its own will overcome the climate crisis if you tax carbon. Like that, every last human being can die thinking the market will save us. The market will die before humanity. Simply allowing market freedom to play. Yesterday, I was told that Adam Smith never talked about free markets thinking about the state. According to our current economists, the free market of income seeking the maximum levels of greed in order to produce a society based on production and not income. Studying Smith or the other classical economists again is something I think is very important today, because forgotten now in economics departments and hearing from the economic departments and on the television, that same rhetoric as the economy of traders and not scientific economy, and we still don't know how to resolve a problem such as the climate crisis. And in the end, if the projects are profitable, they receive a loan. And that's it. And to overcome the climate crisis, do the projects have to be profitable? Is it profitable to think about what to do with the inhabitants of the islands of the Pacific and the Caribbean that are already sinking underwater? Is it profitable to think about what to do with the 8 million inhabitants of Bogota that are already rationing their water 14 hours a week when the city was built on a lake and where greed made it seem a place for speculation until the water ran out? Or anywhere in the world, any example would serve to understand that the climate crisis will not be resolved through profitability, nor through interest rates. And that if we continue this way, obsessed with the idea that the financial market acting freely will resolve the mechanisms of financing of the beginning of the extinction of humanity, aren't we wrong? And time is running out. We can't lose another second, another hour of the time left to humanity, this vital time. Here, we see representatives of oil interests. Oil. Oil isn't to blame. Neither is carbon nor gas. It's just the detritus of the living times of the past, showing us that in the past there was a lot of life and it ended. Oil, for us, is nothing but the significance of death absorbed by the planet and turned into energy, fuel, which we use for greed, for the large-scale expansion of capital, that economic relationship in which some very few make money and the rest of us work for them. And our work is taken away, and we don't live well, and they do. They consume 1,500 times the pollution that they put into the atmosphere, more than the pollution created by an average worker. Each one of them 1,500 times more than any of their workers. The exploitation is where you'll find the explanation of the fate of humanity, because the other side of greed is the exploitation of human beings. Oil, taken from, as one indigenous leader, Roberto Correa Ura, said, the border areas between Colombia and Venezuela, and he said it taking the oil from the veins of the earth 25 years ago, more than that, 30 years ago, this was said, when we weren't talking about the climate crisis yet. And they called him crazy, the journalist did. How can he dream of trying to stop development? Because there, in his lands, there was a possibility that there would be oil production. And not thinking that oil is the blood of the earth, and this group was able to oppose this oil production there in their land, and they were absolutely right. Even in the face of science at that time, indigenous thinking, ancestral knowledge was much more right than the economists and scientists of the Oxy Company, if I'm not mistaken, which wanted to exploit the lands of that indigenous community. Let's look at it now. What has been done with the money that came from oil? Extracted in a certain part of the world. Some of it here, our neighbors in Venezuela, now blocked. A part of the society which is literally dying of hunger on land that is some of the richest in the world if we assess oil at market prices. Millions have crossed these lands and are here, millions. The Swedes are afraid of the Syrian migration at some 200,000. 3 million Venezuelans came through here, and we didn't get scared because we consider them our brothers. And they continued towards the south. Now they're going towards the north, towards the United States. And that's whose idea it was to place this embargo on Venezuela. Victims of their own invention. The embargo is just a boomerang thrown against a country to kill it, and it returns to the same country that threw it. And then there are fascists that don't want migrants, no Colombians or Mexicans or Latin Americans or others in the United States. Discrimination on ethnic grounds. Discrimination the same as in the age of slavery. They're only good to do forced labor 18 hours a day, but when we talk about rights, they're no good and they need to be expelled. And where did the oil go? When it's consumed in the great factories of greed, part of it goes into the atmosphere. And that is the problem. That is the problem. Until we accept that this is a problem, we will not resolve it. If oil and carbon go into the atmosphere, we will die. And in the factories of greed, they're not building the wealth of the world, not the economic stability of the world. They're building our own deaths, the deaths of our children and grandchildren, of everyone. And the other part of oil turns into dollars and euros. And it goes into the capital funds of Wall Street or the City of London. And these funds don't lend to our countries at a good price. They lend at high interest rates, and we live in debt with those masters of the debt bonds, which in addition to the market interest rates, they add a plus, they add on top of that they call the risk prime. And so our countries and our economies and our societies and the majority of humanity lives paying this extra risk that doesn't come from the market because they say that we're risky. They literally exploit us. In an economy that is stagnant and in crisis and has been since 2008, which consumes ever more oil and carbon, the wealth in dollars from oil, turns into the debt of our countries. And they charge us according to interest rates plus risk prime. And I ask myself now, who is riskier, economically speaking, in the world? Risk is not about if the dollar gets lost. It's if life is lost. Or isn't it? Or is the dollar worth more than life? That philosophical conclusion and cultural conclusion is what the world of greed has come to. Is the dollar worth more than life? It seems that in Gaza we're seeing every day and every second that it is. Because they can drop bombs worth millions of dollars on children just because they're Arab, or just because they were the true owners of that place and they were trying to get them out of there by force. The dollar worth more than life. And so you can understand why in the meetings of the political leaders of the world, the decisions that need to be taken are not taken in order to solve life on this planet, to save life on this planet. It's not life that matters, it's the dollar that matters. And it's the masters of the dollars who will see that death is approaching their borders, like a hurricane in the Caribbean that reached Miami, the center of the dollar for Latin America. I ask myself, aren't those countries riskier? If instead of putting the measurements according to dollars, if I calculate them based on CO2 added to the atmosphere, that is to say, units of measure that are deadly to life, don't I get a different result than any economic theoretician should present, if that theoretician were to be economically honest? Not the monetary units, but the units of life, which otherwise are units of CO2 equivalent. The riskiest countries in the world are those which emit the most CO2. That is to say, the wealthy countries. And among the wealthy countries, the riskiest part of society is that part that emits the most CO2. In other words, the wealthy of the earth, the mega-rich, the owners of Twitter and of the networks and the media and the masters of politics and the global centers of power. They are the ones who are killing us. They are the ones who don't care about the children of Gaza or the peoples of Africa or the peoples of Latin America, whom they don't want to allow past their borders after they've dried up their rivers, after they've left their lands infertile, after they have destroyed their basic food, after they have destroyed their living conditions because they've sucked them out through their enormous CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, producing crisis and climate collapse. Just another speech? Maybe. Because humanity has always fought against injustice. Humanity has always fought for equality and freedom. And they have always been forced not to be able to achieve that, but humanity gets ever stronger, and that is the narrative of humanity, fighting for the essence of the human being, to be free and to be equal. And today, once again, we have this problem in our planet. Why do we see these additional risk primes if the real risk comes from the wealthy of the planet, and that should be measured in CO2 equivalent? Haven't we realized that if we remove the risk premium, we have greater capacity as countries to invest in climate and in life? Where are those decisions taken? Let's look at it. If oil generates dollars, and that goes into the capital funds, and those funds lend to third world countries with risk premiums, and the oil is doing a double deadly work, not for its own fault. It generates the CO2 that goes into the atmosphere and produces this problem because it's used to expand and maximize greed. And at the same time, the money that is produced ends up putting all of humanity in debt, pawning the future of humanity in order to pay that risk premium instead of investing in climate, adapting the country so that people don't die because of the climate crisis, and solving and mitigating the climate crisis. China is the owner of the majority of the debt in the world. Socialists or capitalists? Because I would examine some of the socialist principles. Socialism is saving collective life rather than individual earnings. We have to discuss that directly. The alliance of China in the Alliance for Peace means changes within each country. Here, we have stopped hiring gas and oil exploration, and you can't imagine how I've been criticized for it. They ask me, how can you do that? Because we want Colombia's economy, which is very small compared with that of China, we want it to be rooted in life. A global power of life, we said, and I think we're right. This country can be much wealthier thinking about life rather than thinking about the death that has surrounded us. But it's not just China. It's the IMF. It's Europe that closes its eyes to the bombing and genocide, as it closed its eyes in 1942. It's the United States, which are seeing that the very Nazis that fought alongside Chinese, alongside the Soviets, alongside the peoples of the world in the past, and now against the very same ex-allies, they're allowing the Nazis to come to power. Is that how we're going to save humanity? Are we afraid of the waves of Latin Americans reaching the border with the United States? Well, they're able to dominate only if there is prosperity in the South, if this potential for clean energy that we have here in this part of the world can serve them to clean up their own energy matrix. They consume 1,200 gigas of electricity per year. We have a potential of 1,500 gigas of clean energy. So the greed, this not wanting others to also be rich, doesn't that allow for a pact with the Americas that would resolve migration? Because if there weren't hunger in these lands, no Latin American would leave these beautiful lands into the desert. Not one would. But we have to be able to eat amidst this fertility of the land. But we also, in that case, wouldn't have a United States with mortal chimneys emitting into the atmosphere. A pact of the Americas would be a pact of the people. We've said this, why don't we change debt out for climate? Instead of paying dollars to the master of these bonds, the IMF, if the IMF were to change that into a payment also to the owner of the bonds, but based on saving the lives of their children and their grandchildren, saving the lives of all of humanity, caring for the Amazon River, caring for the Congo, caring and being sure that we don't emit CO2. Wouldn't that be a much more sustainable and efficient financial model, even within the greedy manner of production? Discussing this seems to be forbidden, although it is being talked about more and more. We won't emerge from the climate crisis using the same methods from a decade ago, 2 decades ago, a century ago, 5 centuries ago. This is the beginning of extinction. And so we need urgent, immediate methods and policies, and they need to be ones we haven't seen before. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we need to talk about public power, not market. I'm not saying to get rid of the market. I'm saying that the public power must exist and must regulate. And this time, it's not a national public power. It's a global public power. And a global public power that is democratic, a global democracy, which is only possible if the peoples of the world can all speak to each other without being blocked, without systemic or religious differences, if humanity can be and have power. Because what is a global democracy if not humanity with power above private greed and interests? Global public power, planning. Planning is also a word that has been demonized and hidden from politically correct language. Isn't it human beings who plan? They say, no, it's the market that, like some kind of god, plans our lives. It has planned our death. Or else what produced the climate crisis, if not the greed within the market? And so we can't plan as humanity to see where we can invest the treasured money that now turns into usurious debts against the generators of clean energy. And in the places where clean energy can be produced, we can't plan. Because, oh, it affects Africa. It's in South Africa or it's in South America, they say. Those are the excluded of the world. Well, if we're powerful in clean energy, isn't it the life of every North American or Chinese or European citizen that depends on us being able to generate clean energy here where that potential exists? And doesn't that mean planning? Because what market will lead to clean energy being produced in the lands of Africa or in South America if they consider us highly risky because we don't come from the country of greed? Planning, public power, different ways of production, relationships between human beings, and different relationships between human beings and production, a different policy, because certainly whoever generates clean energy can have more power, leaving behind oil and moving into the space of clean energy. Global democracy and not global domination. Global domination only leads us to Ukraine and Palestine and Syria, Libya, Iraq. And it is bringing the same method into our own countries one at a time in a domination that only leads to the death of humanity. Global democracy is what we need. And so this COP16, I hope, will be a turning point. Because deliberately, with premeditation, we didn't want this COP to be held on a high mountain covered in snow, isolated from humanity. We wanted the heat and the flesh and the generosity and the spirit and the happiness of a region like the Pacific and like Cali to be felt, the place where the slaves were brought here by force by the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese in one of the most ignominious moments of humanity, also because of greed, because they were brought to extract the gold. And those communities built their peoples here. They built their culture, remembering it. And they added that hot spiciness that exists in Colombian and Latin American culture that we're so proud of. And we have the indigenous communities in the mountains, and they know what's happening with artificial intelligence, which consumes water irrationally. They know what happens with artificial intelligence if it continues to consume oil and carbon irrationally. And they tell us this without having gone to the universities of the world. Here we have the campesino farmers, people and communities who know that without their food we would die. Here is the people of the parties and of the salsa, the people of happiness and culture that surrounds us. This is not a threat by the people against you. There is generosity and extended hands because they hope that you also will extend that same generosity, not just to the people of Cali and the Cauca Valley, but to all of humanity. Here we are surrounded by joy and human warmth, and we made it that way. We made it so that the people would be the owners of the COP, because the people of the world need to take decisions for global revolution, which is what we need in reality. An old friend of mine who passed away, who once said, "The revolution is a party. It is time to begin a global party, because if we don't begin it, our peoples and our cities will be filled with cemeteries, and we don't want that." Thank you very much for your kind attention.